Hello everyone, and welcome back to Silent Husband Club. We're sorry for the long silence on the channel, but we're back, and from now on, we'll do our best to bring you a new story every single day. Sometimes betrayal doesn't reveal itself in loud arguments or sudden confessions. Sometimes it begins with the smallest fracture in routine, a glance too quick, a phone turned face down, a tremor in the voice. And once you notice that crack, you can't stop seeing it spread. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. It truly helps our channel grow and keeps you updated. It was an evening like any other in Grayford. I had finished another long day at work and returned home, following the ritual that gave me peace. I've always believed that order is a kind of shield, and sticking to routines was my way of holding control over a world that often felt unpredictable. Closing the door behind me, I made my way to the mailbox, collected the usual stack of bills and leaflets, and placed them neatly on the side table. Then, as always, I walked through each room, checking that everything was exactly as I had left it. Some would call it paranoia. To me, it was balance. Everything looked normal until I stepped into the living room. Evelyn was on the sofa, clutching her phone tightly. That, in itself, wasn't unusual. She loved spending evenings chatting with friends or scrolling through her feeds. But that night, something about her posture, her energy, felt off. She was leaning forward, almost curling into the screen as though hiding behind it. And when I entered, she startled. Just a flicker, a tremor in her shoulders, but I caught it. Usually she'd greet me with a quick smile, a kiss, maybe even a playful remark about my late hours. But this time her eyes stayed glued to the screen, her voice flat, distant, "Hey." That moment stuck with me. Small as it was, it etched itself into my mind. I tried brushing it aside, telling myself she was tired, or maybe irritated after some trivial online spat. But a current of unease tugged at me all the same. I went into the kitchen, reheated last night's dinner, and from there I could still see her. Same position, same focus, thumb moving endlessly across glass. And then I saw a pattern. Every time she finished typing, she would flip the phone face down. Evelyn had never done that before. She'd always left her phone lying open on the table, even if she was in the middle of a message. That new habit felt deliberate. I carried my plate into the living room and sat down next to her, trying to sound casual. "What's got you so locked in?" I asked lightly, just teasing. Her reaction was sharp, too sharp. She clutched the phone to her chest as though I tried to snatch it away. "Oh, nothing. Just chatting with the girls," she said, her tone strained. The tension in her voice didn't belong to a harmless group chat. But I kept silent. I've always believed patience reveals more than confrontation. An hour later, she excused herself and left the room, placing her phone on the kitchen counter. I happened to pass by just as a notification lit up the screen. No name. Just a crown emoji. And beneath it, Queen. It was strange. Not the kind of name I'd ever seen among her circle of friends. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. That single glimpse was enough to plant the thought I didn't want to have. Later that night, another detail surfaced in my mind. That morning, Evelyn had complained about cramps, saying she was tired and irritable because her period had started. But she had said the same thing only a week earlier. Evelyn was meticulous about tracking her cycle. She always logged it in her calendar. And yet, when she stepped into the bathroom, I found her phone left open on the bed. Her calendar had no entry. Maybe she'd forgotten. Maybe. Or maybe it was something else entirely. I'm not a man who jumps to conclusions. My life has always been built on logic, not drama. But when enough small pieces start forming a pattern, you can't deny it. And by then, I already had too many pieces to ignore. At dinner, I tried again, keeping it light. Long day, huh? You're glued to that phone like you're guarding state secrets, I said with a grin. Her laugh was too quick, her answer too rehearsed. Oh, just some funny memes from the girls. She waved it off, but her eyes darted away. I stopped pushing. For now, I would not trap her with questions. Not yet. I'd simply wait. Watch. And let her own actions betray her. Over the next few days, that's exactly what I did. And the more I watched, the clearer the pattern became. The days that followed sharpened my senses in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every little detail about Evelyn became magnified, and I caught myself studying her as though she were a stranger I had to learn from the beginning. She no longer left her phone lying casually around the house. Now it was always in her hand, or tucked away in the pocket of her sweater. When it buzzed, she flinched and immediately flipped it face down. At times, she would excuse herself and vanish into the bathroom, phone clutched tightly, only to emerge 20 minutes later with that thin layer of nervous calm spread over her face like a mask. I watched, and the mask grew thinner each day. One evening, she announced that she was going to bed early, leaving her phone charging on the kitchen counter. I sat at the table, pretending to focus on the newspaper, when the screen lit up again. The same crown emoji. This time, the name stretched longer, Queen of the Hole. My eyes locked onto it. It wasn't playful. It wasn't innocent. Whatever that name meant, it was deliberate, and it had weight. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't need to. The unease I felt had already settled into something heavier, something closer to certainty. But I knew that suspicion alone was worthless. If I confronted her now, she would deny everything, and the game would reset. No, if there was a truth to uncover, I needed evidence. And so, the next night, I drove out to my father's workshop by the docks. The air smelled of oil and sawdust, and the familiar clutter of tools brought a strange comfort. My father, Ray, sat at his workbench, beer in hand, while my younger brother, Caleb, leaned against the old lathe. We often gathered there for small talk, but this time, I wasn't there for casual conversation. I told them everything. The sudden secrecy, the strange excuses, the fabricated story about her period, and above all, the cryptic messages from Queen of the Hole. I spoke calmly, laying out the facts one by one, though inside me a storm brewed. My father listened silently, the way he always did when he knew something serious was being laid before him. He took a long drink, set his bottle down, and looked at me with steady eyes. "Son," he said in that voice of quiet authority I'd grown up with, "nobody guards their phone that way if they've got nothing to hide. But don't be reckless. If she suspects you now, she'll only get smarter. Stay calm. Don't let her see you flinch." Caleb nodded, more restless, his jaw tight. "He's right. If you want the truth, you need proof. Real proof. There are ways to get it, but it'll take time and patience. Watch her routines. Look for cracks. Maybe even track her activity, see when she's really online and what she's doing." His voice carried that mix of practicality and younger brother's protectiveness, the kind that made me realize how much they both wanted to shield me from what I already feared. Their words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed what I already knew deep down. Evelyn wasn't just distracted or stressed. She was hiding something. And now, I had to decide how far I was willing to go to find out. That night, when I returned home, I forced myself into calmness. I smiled at her, kissed her cheek, asked about her day as though nothing was wrong. But inside, my mind worked like a machine, cataloging every glance, every pause, every excuse. The game had begun, not hers, but mine. And unlike her, I would not stumble. The days blurred together, yet every one of them left me more unsettled than the last. Evelyn's caution had evolved into obsession. Her phone never left her hand, never rested on a table without her eyes scanning it every few seconds. When it buzzed, she flinched as though the sound itself might betray her. Even her movements around the house seemed orchestrated, calculated to avoid leaving me alone with her device. The very fact that she guarded it so fiercely told me more than any unlocked message ever could. Caleb and I began quietly working together. He had a mind for technology, far sharper than mine, and he showed me patterns in Evelyn's online presence that I never would have noticed. During her long baths or late-night reading sessions, her phone activity spiked. She wasn't idly scrolling through photos of recipes or talking about family gossip. She was engaged, deeply, in long conversations that stretched well past midnight. None of it was visible on her usual apps, which meant she was hiding behind something else, a layer we hadn't yet reached. It was enough to know there was a hidden world, one she lived in parallel to the life she pretended to share with me. But suspicion can only carry a man so far. I needed something solid. That chance came in the smallest of moments, as if fate had briefly tilted in my favor. We were having dinner at my parents' house when Evelyn, distracted by the noise of conversation, left her phone on the table. It sat there, screen dark, while my father poured more coffee and Caleb casually distracted her with a question about her job. Then, in a single flicker, the device lit up again, another message from Queen of the Hole. Before Evelyn could notice, Caleb had already moved, swift as instinct, connecting the phone to his laptop with a discreet cable he had prepared. His hands moved fast, copying fragments of data in the span of seconds. It was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Evelyn turned back toward the table, her eyes immediately searching. Caleb, quick thinking, handed the phone back with a clumsy smile, pretending to wipe it with a napkin as though he'd only been helping with a coffee spill. She gave a thin laugh, forced, but her fingers trembled as she unlocked it and began scrolling frantically. She was deleting things. Erasing evidence. Her desperation was more telling than any message we could have captured. She knew she was hiding something, and that knowledge alone was as damning as the evidence itself. Later that night, Caleb and I pored over what little he had managed to copy. At first it seemed like scraps, nothing clear, only fragments, half-erased files, and traces of a locked folder. But within those traces lay the proof I had feared. Evelyn maintained a separate, password-protected chat. We couldn't see the words themselves yet, but its very existence told me everything. She wasn't simply distracted, or escaping into idle gossip. She was living a life behind a door she'd barred to me, and I was done pretending I didn't see it. I felt the rage rising in me, sharp and clean, but I forced it down. Now wasn't the time to explode. My father's words echoed in me, "Don't flinch, don't strike too soon." I would wait. I would let her weave her lies a little longer, until her own threads strangled her. The decisive turn came on a Friday night when Evelyn announced, with a casual tone she didn't quite pull off, that she would be staying over at her friend Mara's place. Her excuse was dressed in sympathy. "Mara's going through a tough time. She needs me," and she even forced a small, weary smile as though the lie could be softened by kindness. But by then, I had already grown immune to her stories. I nodded calmly, told her it was fine, and watched her leave with an overnight bag slung over her shoulder. The moment the door closed behind her, I dialed Mara's number. Her confused voice, stumbling over words, confirmed what I already knew: there was no visit planned. Evelyn's alibi had collapsed within seconds. Caleb and I had been preparing for this moment. He had already installed a small GPS tracker beneath Evelyn's car, and within minutes we were following her through the darkened streets of Grayford. The silence inside my car was heavy, broken only by the soft buzz of the tracking app updating her location. She didn't drive toward Mara's apartment. She didn't even head into the familiar parts of town. Instead, she wound her way toward the outskirts, to Old Quarry Road, a forgotten stretch lined with old houses whose curtains were always drawn. She pulled up in front of one such house, where the lights glowed warmly inside, and several cars were parked in the drive. I recognized some of those license plates. Men I once called friends. Men who had shared beers with me, laughter with me, advice with me. My chest tightened as I realized what this meant. We parked far enough away to avoid suspicion. Caleb took out his camera, snapping photos of every detail, the cars, the faces slipping through the doorway, the shadows moving against the lit windows. The muffled laughter and voices seeping through the walls struck me harder than any confession Evelyn could have made. Every moment we stayed there carved the truth deeper into my mind, and yet the impulse to storm the house, to tear open the door and confront them all, pulsed inside me like fire. My hand clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened, but before I could move, I felt a weight on my shoulder. My father, Ray, who had insisted on joining us that night, spoke in his steady, unshaken voice, "Not yet. Don't waste your strength on fury. Gather proof she cannot deny. That is how you win." So we stayed. We watched. The hours dragged on, but each one solidified what I already knew: Evelyn was living another life, and she believed it was invisible. She had underestimated me, underestimated the patience she had once admired in me. By the time we drove home in the early hours of the morning, I wasn't shattered anymore. I was resolute. The marriage I thought I had was gone, but the man she thought she could deceive was still standing, and he was no longer blind. The following morning, Evelyn returned with tired eyes and a rehearsed smile. She muttered about a long night with Mara, about comforting her through tears and worries. I looked at her, calm, almost gentle, and asked, "Good night with Mara?" She nodded too quickly, too firmly, and walked past me toward the shower. She didn't see the way I smiled to myself, not with triumph, but with the grim satisfaction of a man who finally holds the truth in his hands. Back at home, the truth weighed on me, but it no longer crushed me. I sat at my desk, spreading out the evidence Caleb and I had collected, the photos of the house on Old Quarry Road, the license plates of men who had once shared my trust, the fragments of messages copied from Evelyn's phone, and that locked folder we had yet to fully crack. Piece by piece, the image was complete. She wasn't only unfaithful, she was proud of it, wrapped in a secret world where she mocked me, where I was the fool in her private play. When Caleb finally managed to restore portions of her deleted files from the cloud, the reality cut deeper than I had braced for. There were screenshots of group chats where she laughed at my routines, ridiculed my patience, called me predictable, controllable. And then, the final blow: images and a video she had shared, private moments between us, twisted into ammunition for her entertainment. That was the moment the last ember of doubt burned out. I showed my father everything. Ray didn't flinch, didn't curse, didn't shout. He studied the evidence with quiet eyes, then finally placed a hand on my shoulder. "That's enough," he said, his voice calm as stone. "Now it's time to act. You don't need to fight with words anymore. You already won the truth." His advice, simple and steady, cleared the haze of rage from my mind. The path forward became obvious. I met with a lawyer in Grayford the very next day, laying out the case. Divorce papers were drawn up swiftly, with every clause and division of property placed squarely in my favor. Evelyn would receive only what the law required, nothing more. Back at home, I left the documents in plain sight on my desk. I didn't have to hand them to her. I wanted her to find them herself, to feel the ground slipping before I even spoke. It didn't take long. I caught her eyes flicking over the bold words: divorce, division of assets, proceedings. She tried to mask her reaction, tried to play casual. "What's this?" she asked, her voice strained. I shrugged lightly. Work. And then I left her in her own silence, to stew in the fear she planted in me for months. That evening, I sat across from her at the dining table, letting the quiet stretch until it became unbearable. Then I asked softly, almost conversationally, "Did you ever believe the truth wouldn't come out?" For a fraction of a second, her face froze. Then she forced a laugh, tried to wave it off, but the tension betrayed her. I didn't look away. "I'm talking about what you've done these past months. About what comes next." The cracks in her mask deepened, and I saw her fighting to keep the performance alive, but there was nothing left for her to cling to. She was unraveling, and I let her. The following morning, I placed the divorce papers directly in front of her on the breakfast table. Her hands trembled as she picked them up, her eyes skimming the pages. Her lips parted, and she whispered my name, desperate, "Andrew, please." "I can explain." But I only leaned back, watching her with a calmness I didn't know I had left. "Explain what? That you mocked me? That you betrayed me? That you thought I'd never see behind the curtain?" My words were quiet, but they struck her harder than any scream. She began to cry, reaching across the table, but I pulled away. "It's over, Evelyn. You destroyed it all." For a heartbeat, her tears turned to fury. "You spied on me. You had no right," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage and shame. I shook my head slowly. "I had every right. You forfeited trust the moment you chose to live a second life behind my back. Pack your things. You're leaving today." And when she walked out that evening, suitcase in hand, the house felt emptier than I'd ever known. But the emptiness was clean. It was freedom carved from ruin. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, tense silences, and the echoes of what had once been a marriage. Evelyn tried at first to play the victim, reaching out to friends, searching for allies, but the evidence was too heavy, too undeniable. Screenshots, photos, fragments of her hidden life, all of it spoke louder than her tears. Even those who once stood close to her began to turn away, ashamed to be associated with the deception she had cultivated. Some of the men she met at that house faced their own storms, their own wives demanding explanations. One lost his family overnight, another his job, and yet none of their downfalls gave me the satisfaction I thought I would feel. Betrayal spreads like fire, and when it burns, it leaves nothing untouched. When the divorce proceedings reached the courtroom, it was swift. The judge reviewed the case with a detached calm, granting Evelyn only what the law required, no more, no less. She sat there across the aisle, her face drawn and pale, her eyes hollowed out by the weight of consequences she could no longer escape. For 12 years I had known her expressions, her laughter, her little habits, and now all I saw was a shell of a woman who had gambled everything and lost. I didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't even look at her longer than necessary. She wasn't worth the energy anymore. When I walked out of the courthouse, the air felt different. Cleaner. Lighter. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of suspicion pressing on my chest. The silence of my home no longer felt like emptiness, but a kind of peace I hadn't realized I craved. Yes, I was alone now, but it was an honest solitude, not the false companionship of a woman who had been laughing at me behind closed doors. There are scars, of course. You don't walk through betrayal and come out untouched. But scars remind you of survival, of what you've endured and what you'll never allow again. I don't call myself a victim, nor do I call myself a victor. I'm simply a man who saw the truth, faced it, and refused to be broken by it. And in that, there is a freedom Evelyn will never know. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, shocked you, or simply made you think, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, your thoughts, your story, your truth. Subscribe for more raw, real, and unforgettable confessions. And if this story made you feel seen, share it. Someone else might need to hear it too. You're not alone here. This channel is a safe space for those who've been betrayed, broken, and rebuilt.